Hello, 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 and welcome to Just Talking with Ayesha Adami Migueda and myself, Gwenda Lambert. So tonight, it's first of all, we're getting cold here now, eh? Like now that we're all into October, it's
Yep.
almost single digits for us, which is great sleeping weather. And today and for the rest of October, we're going to be talking about communication. And this is something that Aisha's really taking on in her coaching business. But of course, the words that we use have an impact on us, even if we think that they're. I think that a lot of times we use words that dramatizes or makes a situation that may be challenging worse for ourselves because we listen to the words that we use. So again, because this is Aisha's wheelhouse, not that we don't, again, we're sort of two sides of the same coin. We come at two different directions to the same types of um, focus because communication is key. And whether it's, you know, body language, not just the words, the tones we use, all of this needs to be, oh, let's see, Aisha, intentionally designing your life. A little plug. So take it away, Aisha. Tell us what you have in mind for um, communication with clarity.
Thank you, Gwen. Love you and so grateful to be with you every week. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're well. I hope you had a good weekend and are getting ready to get into the week. And as Gwen said, I've really shifted my coaching practice and I'll be working more as a purposeful communication coach. So this is really my wheelhouse. It's something that I've been doing for most of my life. So I'm really happy to be able to share some of the tools and the skills that I've developed over the years to support all of you as well. So when we're talking about clarity and communication, there are three elements that we're going to talk about, and one of them is about intention, and we're also going to talk about observation, and we're going to talk about assessment. These are the three parts of clarity and communication. So in the first part, which is intention, that is also broken down into three different steps. So the first step is to know the purpose of your conversation. What is actually the purpose of it, and to really keep that front and center in your mind. A lot of people, when they're having conversations, what happens is that they get into this little tug of war, and it's between the relational aspect of the conversation and the outcome aspect of the conversation. Now, if
Mm,
you're in a conversation, if you're not really focused on what is the purpose of your communication, things get really messy really fast. So if you're, for example, you want to talk to your spouse, you want to get into, you want to you're talking about buying something, right? So you want to have a conversation about, what kind of blender you want to buy, what kind of sofa you want to buy, what kind of car you want to buy, right? And you start having this conversation with them, and then all of a sudden you start sensing that you are having some kind of reaction to what they're saying, right? So you're feeling like maybe you're feeling emotionally manipulated. Maybe you're feeling like they're controlling the conversation. Maybe you're feeling like you're not being seen or you're not being heard. And then the conversation shifts from the actual purpose of the conversation, which was about buying that particular item, to what's happening and what's going on in the dynamic of our relationship. And that really conflates and convolutes the conversation so that often it goes off track. Things get out of hand, things are said that are really not relevant to that conversation at all. Doesn't mean that it's not important, but you want to make sure that the purpose of your conversation is being supported as you're going forward, right? So you want to keep in mind
mhm.
uh, as you're having that conversation is, am I staying focused on what I'm actually here to do, what the purpose is of that conversation, right? And when I took Cynthia Kane's intentional communication course, which is an amazing course, and I highly recommend it to people from the Intentional Communication Institute, um, she taught six particular things to keep in mind when you're having a conversation. Now, they are to when you're thinking about the purpose of your conversation, to make sure that you are coming to it in a kind, honest, and helpful way, so that your words are always, you're thinking about positive intent. So you're being kind, you're actively listening, you're paying attention to what people are saying, you're honest. And we're going to talk a little bit about honesty in a second, a little bit more about honesty, because honesty is not just about speaking the truth, but it has a lot of nuance to it. So we're going to talk about that. And then, is it helpful? Is what you're adding to this conversation actually helping this conversation, or is it detracting from the conversation, right? The other three things she mentions is that you need to be clear, you need to be concise, and you need to be conscious. And we're going to talk more about that next week when we talk about responsibility and communication, because responsibility and communication always lies with us. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more next week. So coming back to intention, the second part of intention is about being authentic, is that you're always being yourself in that moment. You always know that you're going to speak your truth. You're going to be real about what's happening. So if something doesn't feel good to you, that you're able to respond with that emotional honesty. You're able to say, you know what, that doesn't feel good to me. Now, there are all kinds of ways to respond to something that doesn't feel good to you, from having a full-blown meltdown to just shutting down, right? And everything in between that. So being authentic means that whatever way feels right to you in that situation, and keeping in mind, so this is a mindful piece, is keeping in mind that you want to focus on the purpose of the conversation. You want to be kind, you want to be honest, you want to be helpful. You get to choose how, in what way you're going to be authentic, right? And that means you get to pick whether you're going to have that meltdown, or whether you're going to shut down, or whether you're going to do something in the middle, which could just be, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this right now, or I need to step back from this conversation for a bit, or, you know what, I don't actually agree with that even, right? And that's something too that people have difficulty with, is agreeing to disagree. So that's another piece of it, is to be authentic. So intention, authenticity, and the third piece is honesty. So what we're talking about is being honest. And the way that I think about honesty in a conversation is that I think that actually having integrity is more important than being honest, because honesty is a kind of a tricky thing, right? You might find yourself in a situation where you can't be entirely honest, where you feel like you have to hold some things back. You don't know how much of the truth to tell someone, right? You don't know when is the right time to be honest with someone. Um, they, the difference, again, you know, this in a similar way of being authentic, is when you're trying to be honest with someone, you can be honest in a really simple way. You can say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with our interactions. And you can maybe have one or two examples of that. And that's being honest. And you can also be honest with a whole laundry list of things, which, unfortunately, when you take that stance, it puts you in an adversarial position to the person in front of you. So you pick and choose about how, you know, and I feel like honesty is actually the expression of integrity. So if you can find a way to express your integrity, right, that's actually what you want to really focus on. And the details of the honesty, that is up to you to decide how you want to impart that, right? So that's the three elements of the intention, are the purpose of your conversation, the authenticity with which you have that conversation, and then the honesty that you bring to the table, right? So those are the three things. So that's around intention. Now there's two more, but let me check in with you, Gwen. What do you think about those?
Well, I mean, there's so many things, like, you know, as you know, I teach self-defense, and one of the things that we talk about when I ask these young ladies this week, at least half the class is going, well, I want to beat up. It's about beating up other people, and it's like self-defense, and this may not seem like it's the same thing, but it is. It's like, in the days that we have right now, where on TV the clapback is glorified, or the having this sarcastic retort is almost glamorized, and you know, because the one thing, and again, because you're talking about the blender, And the thing is that this has to be an ongoing, everything that you said about the honesty. So this has to be an ongoing thing that you agree in whatever relationship you're in to be honest. And what does that mean? So like, again, I'm just using the self-defense analogy because that's what I was teaching this week, is that the whole thing about self-defense is never getting into fight. The violence is last on the list, and that's never the first, the first thing. And that it's about de-escalation. That if somebody's in a bad mood and you just happen to get with them on a bad day, and this matters more when we care about the people. Like, we talk about it in a, you're out in the world in general, but you talk about your blender. Well, you can say, oh, and then person that we're talking to is going off on a tangent because it's no longer about the blender. So one of the two things that popped out is, number one, when we use always or never, when we're in a conversation with people, you always do that. And it's like, you never go on my, like, and anything that's always or never is always, there's always, and this is where always actually works. There's always something else to that message. But the other thing is that as the kind person receiving that communication, as Stephen Covey says in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, first go to understand and then be understood, right? You can say, are we still talking about the blender? Now you could be, are we still talking about the blender, which is escalating? Or you can say, are we still talking about, and even like lowering your voice and becoming grounded within yourself to say, what's the intention? So I love all of that. What's the intention? I don't want to fight with this person. There's something else going on, and it's not about the blender. And I care enough about this person to want to get to where the truth of that is, right? And I think that's sort of the honesty part, is what is the truth of where you're both standing there? Is there something between us? Is there something outside? So I love I love it, all of it. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thank you. And I absolutely agree with you. And some of that stuff that you're talking about, things around always and never, around tone, around people listening to respond rather than actually listening to understand. Those are things that we're going to talk about next week when we talk about your responsibility when it comes to communication, because you don't have any control over what other people are responsible for or how they're coming to the conversation. The only thing you can do is to come with your own integrity to the conversation, with your own purpose, your own integrity, and with the will and the intent to understand and to try and get to a resolution if that's possible. The other piece about that is to recognize that, sometimes it's not possible, right? Sometimes you can't get the outcome that you're looking for. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So intention is the first element of clarity. The second is observation. So that's really understanding what works in a situation and what doesn't, right? So to observe it when something is, to be really present in that moment, which is part of our responsibility in a conversation, is to be present enough that we can see when something is actually having the desired effect and when something is not, and to not continue to go down that path when we know that it's only creating drama, it's only creating problems and challenges in that communication, it's only making things worse. So a lot of times in coaching, in a lot of other behavioral aspects, the advisory is, if you can't do anything right, try not to do any harm, right? If you can't make it better, try not to do any further harm. And that's something to kind of keep in the back of your head, as well as to observe what is the behavior, what is the activity, what is the communication that is either keeping things on track and what is taking you off track from that, right? And that also means being open to your own emotions at that moment. So it doesn't mean shutting things down. It means observing what's happening with you and what's happening with other people. In that observational moment, you're going to see whether this is a conversation you can continue to have at this time, whether someone else can continue to have at this time. You can ask that question. Like, the clarification is very important. Would you like to continue this conversation now? Would you like to continue it later? Or, I'm not able to continue this conversation now. I need a little bit of time to think. I'll come back to you in another time, right? So it's being able to observe your own emotions, observe other people's emotions, observe the interaction that's happening, and to make conscious and mindful choices about how you want to go forward on something. And that also means recognizing when habitual patterns are coming up.
Mhm.
What are some habitual ways that, like, let's say you have the intention of having that mindful conversation with your partner about what you're going to purchase. But as the conversation wears on, you find you're interrupting each other, or you're talking over each other, or you feel like your voices are being raised, right? Then you know you're falling into a habitual pattern. And that's the time when you want to scale back and say, okay, no, maybe we need to take a break. This is also a time where, when again, coming back to the responsibility piece, is thinking about um, uh, what do I want here, right?
Mhm.
What do I
Mhm.
want here? And I heard an amazing analogy, and I'll share that again next week when we talk about this more. And it's sorry, not analogy, an acronym. So it's WAIT, WAIT, which is why am I talking? Why am I talking? Is this conversation serving my purpose? And it's observing that in all the moments of the conversation as much as
Mhm.
possible, right? Why am I talking? So that helps to keep you on track, right? So that's number two, observation. So we've got intention, we've got observation. Gwen, any thoughts on observation?
Well, I love that because when I was introduced to weight, it was introduced in the context of in a meeting in the business place. You're talking, and again, everything is a relationship, right? We think, I mean, the interesting part, and I would also like to just note integrity in action. I love that. I love that because this is, if you value honesty, if these are your core values, um, then whether you're in a business meeting or whether you're dealing with your spouse or your child or a friend, your intention should be whatever your values are. So if your values are to be joyfully honest, and that's one of mine. And why do I say joyfully? Because sometimes if we need to get creative with this wonderful English language that has thousands and thousands of words extra, quite literally, when you compare it to any other language, there's so many different words that can describe what we think, feel, or are trying to express. So does that mean that you start, increasing your vocabulary every day, or not using $10 words, just find the words that really speak to what it is that you're saying. So I love the weight because again, it's usually promoted in business meetings, right? If you're going to talk at a meeting, what is it that you're talking about? Is what you have actually adding to the conversation that's going on, or do you just want to hear yourself talk? And both of those are giving you information as the receiver of that communication, right? So I love that. And that's the observation is the great part is when you start with this kind of stuff, when you start observing how you speak to yourself, never mind how you speak to others, then everything shifts. All your relationships shift because you're going to stop yourself before you say that thing that you know is throwing a little bit of gasoline on the fire, right? Or we hope. Or
That's right.
sometimes you just want to get in a fight, go, sometimes that happens too. So that's part of your learning curve, but it's also any interaction with two people. Because you started by saying kind. Well, the kindest thing is that if somebody is reacting instead of when they normally respond, that's your clue as the listener to go, hey, are you okay? Is everything okay? You just seem a little, and don't put people down. Like you seem like a little edge. It's just like you just don't you just seem a little bit not like yourself today. There's ways that we can phrase these that aren't saying, hey buddy, back off. What's your problem? Like so that's just an example. That's what I've taken away so far. This is like a whole seminar. I love it. Okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like the phraseology is really important. And that's actually a whole other, that could be a whole 4 weeks all on its own on how to, what kind of phrasing, what kind of questions, what kind of like What kind of responses are responses that are validating, that are invalidating, that are inclusive, that are exclusionary? You know, that's a whole, just the language that we use is something that you could really just do like a whole 4 weeks on how language is used, right? Yeah, and we'll definitely, that's something
Agreed.
that I'm definitely going to think about it. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the last piece of the clarity in communication. So we've got intention, we've got observation, and the third piece is assessment, right? And that is to actually think about. So the second part of weight, which is WAIT. The second weight that I learned was, what am I thinking? So you have, why am I talking? So that's weight number one. And the second one is, what am I thinking? That's weight number two. And in that moment, it's really important to, you know, as you were talking about self-communication, it's also about self-awareness and self-understanding, about not just the purpose, but what is it that, what is important to me in this moment? Where is there flexibility in this moment? What is the place that I'm willing to compromise, and what is the deal breaker, right? So you want to really assess, what am I willing to change in this dynamic to get to the outcome that I want, right? So let's go back to that conversation with you and your spouse. Things are getting out of hand. Things are, you know, your voices are being raised, that you're interrupting each other. You have that opportunity to scale back and say, hey, you know what? Can we reframe this? Can we rewind a second? I love you, and this is not the conversation that I thought we were going to have about this. How do you feel about us kind of just coming back to the purchase of this item? Okay. And figure out, I would like to talk to you about the other stuff that's happening. Maybe we can do that at a different time. Can we do that at a different time? It's all of a sudden interrupting that pattern, breaking that pattern, and saying, okay, what do I need to do here to fulfill the purpose that I had originally designed for this conversation, right? So what am I willing to change to get to have the conversation in a way that we actually get to the outcome that we were looking for, right? What are some different avenues that I might be willing to take to do this? And you can do that spur of the moment, or it's something that you can think about, especially if it's someone with whom you tend to have difficult conversations. We all have people in our lives where we know that when we have a conversation, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging. We know some of the objections they're going to bring up. So this is to prevent us from coming into that situation and being reactive or being resistant, but actually being pliable, being malleable, thinking about, how can I flow with this conversation? How can I help this to move? And it's not always that you have to be butting heads with somebody or be in an adversarial position. Sometimes when you're flowing, and we've talked about this before, that water shapes stones by flowing around it. And that's how you make change that is lasting, and that can really cut through something like stone that's very hard. It can cut through that if we can just find a way to flow. So how do I flow in this conversation, right? You keep assessing it, and you reframe your intention and purpose. What is my intention and purpose? How can I bring that conversation back to the purpose that originally I had designed it for, right? So that's the third piece. So you have intention, you have observation, and you have assessment. What do you think about assessment?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I think one of the most interesting things, like when I look back over like a self-improvement, I don't like using words like that. Like when we know better, we do better. But back in the day was, how am I talking to myself? And this is still ongoing. This is like 30 years later, 40 years later, actually, in some cases. But I remember once again, I had these nice suede pants. I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but this is exactly the situation where, I had a spot on it. So I started derailing myself. And the person in the elevator was a friend, and he just goes, well, that's a lovely way to talk. And so that's exactly it, is how do we interrupt? First of all, we have to notice that how we're talking is not the way we want to show up. and then not beat ourselves up at that point, but come to a place where we can actually go, okay, man, this isn't working. And am I in a good space right now? And I'm sure with what you said about responsibility, we're going to be getting into all this stuff next week, which is fabulous, because we need to accept responsibility for everything that we say, not everything everybody else says, but it's like, even when it comes to, the phrasing, I feel this, not you always do that. So it's, once you notice yourself automatically going to a solution instead of identifying the problem, again, getting back to the values. So all those are really the top three, right? Those really are, is like, what is your intention? Who is it that you want to be? And you know what? You have to be able to be that, whether you're at home by yourself or whether you're out in a meeting, right? That if somebody's being disrespectful, that's one of the things I do, is you can still talk to somebody in a smooth, calm voice and just go, I don't think you're being, you can also sometimes interject for other people if that's the case, because we are all at different levels on this planet. Some people don't know what respect looks like. Some people don't know how to speak with respect. So I think if our focus is on our assessment and sharing what our process is with other people, just by showing them, even by saying, are we really still talking about a blender? In a calm voice, not a, oh my God, here you go. Are we still talking about a blender? There is 1,000 different ways that we can take responsibility. So I'm looking forward to next week, because this has been awesome. And I love when you get into this groove, because this is your wheelhouse, my friend. So
Thank
thank you.
you. Thank you. It feels good, because because I've been doing this all of my life. So I feel like now I really have, this whole reservoir of knowledge and information and skills and tools and trips and tips and tricks that I can share with people. So I'm really looking forward to sharing more about it. I have just a couple of other considerations that I want to end off on for the clarity piece, and that is that when we're talking about reframing the purpose and being aware, being self-aware of how we're reacting in a situation, which may be affecting the clarity, there are a couple of things, like the 3 R's of how you are how you're responding in the situation. So are you, is your purpose being challenged by your desire to be right? Right? If you have a purpose, but you're swaying away from that purpose because you need to be right, that's a relational issue. That's not an outcome issue, and that belongs to you.
Nice.
So it's owning that, right? That, okay, can I give up being right because I actually want to get to the outcome of that I've created for this situation, right? You want to also think about whether you're being reactive to what's happening. Are you being responsive to what's happening, which is listening, responding, being kind, being honest, being helpful? Are you doing those things, or are you reacting in that situation, right? So you want to kind of scale back and take a look at that. And the third consideration is, are you resistant? Are you being resistant in a situation where someone is giving you information that you don't accept, you don't think is right, you don't believe, you are dismissing? It's being aware of what is your bias in that situation that is disabling you from being responsive in that situation. So being responsive in a situation is something also that we're going to talk about more. And I think in the third week, when we talk about self-communication, that's where we can really dig into the responsiveness, where that, because as you said, Gwen, you can't be responsive to other people if you're not responsive to yourself. And that's really, we're kind of drilling down from clarity to responsibility to self-communication. So we're going deeper and deeper into how communication is formed, and understanding also there's cultural aspects, there's family, there's socialization, there's, we all learn from observation. It's called observational learning. This is how we develop our skills at a very young age. And sometimes we don't know that the skills that we learned long ago are actually not helping us now. They're actually getting in our way. They're sabotaging the goals that we have for ourselves, right? And then the last thing is to think about the whole purpose of purposeful communication is not necessarily for you to have your way in every
Mm,
conversation. It's not about you getting what you want in every situation. It's about you being clear enough, grounded enough, and committed enough to the purpose with which you're communicating, that when you walk away from a situation, whether you got what you wanted or not, that you can be confident and you can be at peace that you were seen, you were heard, you were able to express yourself, and that you did it all with integrity, and that you can walk away from that conversation in that way. And that is the main goal of purposeful communication.
oh my gosh. Woo! I don't know about you guys. I feel like that, that Harman Kardon where the person turns on the stereo and they're sitting there and their hair is all blowing back. That's what I feel like. Although this is beautiful. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you, Annie.
beautiful. So next week we're going to be back here and I am going to figure out this live streaming. If anybody watching this has any insight into Zoom peculiarities with Facebook, please contact me. But that's going to be a research thing this week. But oh my gosh, that's just perfect. What a great, that was like, you just tied that up in a nice, neat little bow. Thank you for sharing all this information and again, the interesting thing is how it applies. The biggest thing about the language, how we speak, we think that we compartmentalize. We think that we show up as a different person in everything that we do, but we don't. We have our same, as you say, your biases. And unless we pay attention to ourselves and go, do I really believe that? Then some of those cultural, societal, upbringing, we don't know to question that, you know, and that's where it gets really interesting because even here's just a great example, and this is just on the grief recovery work that I do now, is that it's really interesting that when you look at something as a whole, the observation part, instead of saying, coming in with almost a bias, oh, my relationship was so and so, there was this and this. And until you actually sit down with that relationship and actually give it the light that it deserves, the intention, all of that stuff, then you look at the words that you're using, or even the words that come out tell you a different story. So if we do not have that assessment, reflection is what people in the new age or whatever, but I like the assessment, because an assessment, when there's an assessment, there's an outcome, right? When there's an assessment, it's usually a solution-based focus, as opposed to reflection, which can sort of be a passive thing. And it's sort of like, oh, this is what I did. It's like, okay, that's great. If you keep doing what you've always done, you'll have the same results that you'll always have. So I love the word. And again, this is why language matters. It matters that we use the right words, especially when we're talking to ourselves. So I'm really looking forward to our Halloween episode. We're going to be dressed up. I just threw that in. I know you're okay with that, right?
Yvette,
But that's right. Like that's the biggest thing. Assessment is reflection, but assessment sounds like, and again, you would hear assessment more in a business, a professional setting, whereas reflection is what you hear in the self-help kind of world. Whereas a reflective assessment, let's combine those words, because what is it about? It's not just about assessing as you're going on. It's like, okay, what am I going to do with this information now? What are my values?
absolutely. Yeah.
Is it ongoing learning? Is it showing up? Is it being emotionally honest and present? Am I actually doing that and holding yourself accountable? So I love assessment. That's my 2 cents. So any
Wonderful.
last thoughts? I know that it was not 2 cents, it was $5, but still.
It's all good. And it's great that we are able to kind of add on to everything, because I love everything that you're talking about in terms of how this terminology applies in one place or doesn't apply in another place. And how, to be honest with you, it's really all very fluid. And when we stop compartmentalizing, and I feel like that's my experience now, is is to be able to take apart those compartments and to be able to allow everything to really flow together so that it lands up in the place that it needs to land up without me necessarily forcing it or putting it into a box or saying, this is where it belongs. It just naturally flows. And if we stick with the analogy of fluidity, what happens is that things change. Over time, something that belongs over here is now going to flow over there, and then it's going to flow over that way, right? And it's allowing that stuff to happen, accepting that that change is going to happen. And for us to not be so rigid with ourselves, we're going to talk about that with responsibility. We're going to talk about that with self-communication. Is part of this is kind, honest, and helpful. It's not just about what you do with other people, it's how you talk to yourself. It's how you express yourself to you as well. And communication, let's face it, communication creates our reality. How we communicate with ourselves, how we communicate with others creates the reality that we live. And just as quickly we can change it if we change the way that we communicate.
Beautiful. Woo! Okay. I know we've already done the Harmon card. So this is our little $15 this week. It's
That's
more
right.
than 2 cents. And I mean, there's so many juicy tidbits in there. So next week, join us at 7 o'clock. We are going to be back here and we will be talking about responsibility
in communication. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so thank you all. Any questions, just forward them to us and we shall see you next week right here on Just Talking with Ayesha and Gwenda. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Have a great week. Thank you, lovely. I'll see you soon.
Okay, you too.